And so I enter into evidence, my tarnished coat of arms. My muses acquired like bruises, my talismans and charms. The tick, tick, tick of love bombs, my veins of pitch black ink. Oh, here we go again.
Hi guys, welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you are new. My name is Ali, and today we are revisiting the Tortured Poets department. I actually cannot believe it's been an entire year since we got this album. Genuinely feels like yesterday I was sitting here hearing these songs for the first time, or even earlier than that, theorizing about what they might be. Basically, today, in honor of the album's anniversary, I wanted to revisit this work of art, the album, the era, and have a pretty casual chat about revelations I might have had since then, things that have changed for me. And then of course I will be reacting to your unpopular opinions about the album and then bravely sharing my own. And before we get into all of this, I also just want to say thank you so much for all of the love on my Fearless Deep Dive video. That was such a passion project, something I had wanted to do for a long time. One of my favorite things is to help sort of shed a new light or open some appreciation for something people maybe didn't like before, and I always see Fearless towards the bottom of people's rankings. So I'm hoping that I can change that for a couple of people, but also, like I mentioned in that video, to me it's just essential to understand that album, that era, in order to appreciate and fully understand Reputation, but also the Tortured Poets department. As I'm filming this, tomorrow will be 1 year since we got this album, also meaning the first full year since 2019 that we haven't had an announcement or any new album from Taylor, which is like insane that to go just one calendar year is rare for us now. We're just so spoiled. I also feel like I need to take the time to acknowledge, address, and apologize to those of you who, on my recommendation, went and watched Dead Poets Society because of how much I talked about it in the lead up to getting this album. I really should have warned you, and I'm sorry for that. I think because I've loved this film so much since I was a kid, I've just blocked out how it ends. So that part doesn't exist in my mind.
Dr. Overstreet has been one of the leaders in his field for a long time. We met at MIT in the late 80s. Thank you.
And also thank you, by the way, to everyone who submitted their unpopular opinions and hot takes for this video. I am very excited to react to them, and I apologize to any that I couldn't feature. As always, I'm overwhelmed by how much you guys have to say and how many of you are willing to join in on this conversation, so thank you. Let's check out the results of the polls on my story. I just love collecting a little bit of data. So I asked the class if you could only listen to one half of the 31 tracks, would it be standard Tortured Poets department or the anthology? For the majority of the time this poll was up, that was at an even 50-50. It has now, in the final hour, changed to 49 to 51, with the anthology taking it. I'm not really surprised by that answer. If anything, I didn't think it would be so close. Obviously, this also just says more about my own personal following. It's not necessarily a large enough collation of data. We only had 13,000 people vote, which is very fitting, but I don't know if we can call this statistically significant. I'd love to know the breakdown here of like people that became fans in the Folklore Evermore era and really appreciate or prefer that kind of music from Taylor, let's say depressing, because to me the anthology very much mirrors Folklore and Evermore, whereas songs on the standard album I'd say more closely reflect Midnights, Fearless, Red, and Speak Now, I would say. Let me know in the comments what you think about that, but for which is the best variant track, I am not at all surprised by these results, with 50% of the vote going to the Black Dog. Yeah, I think we all kind of collectively love Angry Taylor, and she really just let loose on that song. Then 29% going to the Bolter. I actually am surprised that the manuscript only got 13%. For a song that so beautifully walks down memory lane and references her catalogue and things that we've bared witness to, that's like a very nostalgic song to me. Then the Bolter at 29%, the Albatross at 8%. That doesn't really surprise me. I think the Albatross sonically is very different to other Taylor songs. The messaging is very similar to songs like Peace, maybe, what's a song from 1989 I'm trying to think of? I Know Places. It's addressing a theme that we've seen woven throughout her songs for a while, but sonically in a very different way. But I am surprised by the manuscript, because I think that might be my pick for this. I think I would pick the manuscript, then the Black Dog, then the Albatross, which is interesting because I think that was my skip when I ranked the album. It will be interesting to go back and revisit my tier ranking of this album, because I actually think for the most part, I would agree with most things I said. I asked you guys on Twitter like which songs have really grown on you in the past year, and great seeing people's answers, but it made me realize that most of my opinions that I held a year ago I kind of still agree with. And if I did in fact say the Albatross was my least favorite, that is no longer true. I also asked of those 4 variants, which of the pictures you guys liked best. The black dog one, unsurprising to me. I think that is the best visual of these 4. For a second, I was gonna say, I'm glad it's the cover of the anthology, but it's not. The anthology is right there. What am I confusing it with? Maybe this is just the digital cover, but so the black dog being the best, then tied the manuscript and the Albatross covers, and then no one liked the bolter. I actually quite enjoy the bolter, and if it didn't have a border, because I just prefer it without, I would not have hated that being the album cover. I just think the Albatross cover wouldn't have worked as well as an album cover, but the other 3 really do. And finally, I asked, recency bias aside, which album would you give album of the year to? So within this question, I'm saying only one of them could be awarded it, because I do kind of think that was the Academy's opinion as well. They wouldn't do 2 years in a row. Would you pick Midnight's or the Tortured Poets Department? And this was also 50-50 for a long time, but is now split 43% Midnight's, 57% Tortured Poets. I will say it's hard for me to assess this and separate recency bias. I do think because it's the most recent album we have, it's fresher, we love it more. I'm not saying that that's necessarily the reason the vote is split this way, but I do think that like we all would be subconsciously impacted by that. As for my own personal choice, I really think I'm struggling to be impartial because it's the newest, shiniest toy that we have. But I mean, in terms of like rollout, Midnight's was phenomenal because of the amount of music videos it had, the nature of it being so accessible and pop, and also the fact that it had so much of the eras tour kind of boosting it up. But the songwriting on Tortured Poets, I think she has my vote here. But thank you to everyone who voted in that and who votes in my Instagram polls when I do them. I find it very fun and insightful. Okay, so one of the first things I wanted to talk about when looking back at this album is something that I feel like the conversation was missing or has been missing, which is the insummation poem. That addition to the album provided so much essential context. And when I see people discussing the album or even arguing about the topic of a song or the meaning of something, I think really all we have to do is go back to those words because it sheds so much light on how Taylor was feeling. And it's so valid if you haven't read this or haven't read it in a while because it only really existed on the physical vinyl. So if you didn't have that, you might not have ever really paid much attention to it. So that's very fine. But I will just recommend, if you haven't seen any of my Tortured Poets deep dive series and you only care to watch like 10 minutes of something, I would just recommend to watch the breakdown of that poem. I really just think we cannot even begin to understand this album or talk about it without first addressing those very key words. That insummation poem set the tone for everything we went on to hear and discuss in the album. And one of the main things to me was why she had to write it and why she had to write so much of it, including all 31 songs. One of the main criticisms of this album that we see online and also very, very present in my submissions of hot takes today is that this album was bloated and needed to be cut down. Or conversely, just that both albums or both parts of the album should exist but should have been released more independently, kind of like a Folklore and Evermore situation. Which, side note, it is so interesting to think about what it would have been like if Folklore and Evermore kind of dropped in a double drop as part of the same project. Obviously this wasn't possible because the songs weren't written yet, but to just imagine a world where that happened, I definitely think they both benefited from being such separate albums, even though cohesively they could have existed like the anthology as one collection of work. Now, I do agree that this project would have been better received by both the general public and also fans, and also like critics and awards voters, had the Tortured Poets Department been released in two separate forms with like a little bit of time for processing in between. But I don't necessarily agree that that was the right choice to do. To me, if you read that insummation poem, it very much supports the notion that Taylor did not really give a fuck about how this album performed, like chart-wise, numbers-wise. It was purely an act of catharsis to release this. Ultimately, I think she just wanted to get all of these stories out so that she could move on. And so by delaying the anthology by say 6 months, it keeps her trapped in that era or period. And I think it's very clear she didn't want that. I feel like I remember Taylor writing, "Only once we have spoken our saddest story can we be free of it." I can't remember where she said that, but it's so clear in my mind because that to me felt like she poured all of her pain and processing into this album and released it. I'm picturing like when bird mothers like kick their babies out of the nest, which is just not really an accurate metaphor. But I think, you know, this had been 2 years of experiencing and writing this. She was ready for it to be done so that she could move forward. And I think not only is that quote or statement, does that apply to her, I think it also applies to us regular normal folk. You know, Taylor wanted to put this album, all 31 tracks of it, out because they all explored a different side of grief. We had so many different sides to the story in every part of processing a breakup, a loss of self, depression, the many various themes we saw explored on this album. And by releasing so much, I mean that in terms of emotion, but also track numbers, I think that allowed Taylor to leave it there. Something I think that we can all take away from that in our own lives is that in order to heal and move forward from something, you actually really do have to experience the whole picture. And maybe for us, that's not writing a song, but it's talking to your friends, it's journaling, and most of all, it's just allowing yourself to feel that. Those ugly emotions that you think, oh, that's probably not right for me to feel that way, or I think it's just so important to give yourself permission to experience those more complex feelings in order to get out the other side. One of my favorite parts of that insummation poem was this passage. Tried wishing on comets, tried dimming the shine, tried to orbit his planet, some stars never align. Now, I know I already did a whole deep dive on this poem, but I just felt like we got such a key part of the story here. Like, this is a person putting in so much effort to save a relationship. Like, think about how well that parallels lyrics like, you say I abandoned the ship, but I was going down with it. Holding on for dear life to the point where you can see the white knuckle grip. Oh, my lights are out, gay rights. Or even, my face was grey, but you couldn't admit that we were sick, or the entirety of Bejeweled. And to me, that line really links back to another part of the poem. It was house and then cardiac arrest. That is one of my favorite things still to this day. First, she endured house arrest, being locked away, unappreciated, kind of cut off from the world and maybe parts of herself.
Years of labor, locks and ceilings in the shade of how he was feeling.
Feeling trapped, underappreciated, but then cardiac arrest, something so opposite and drastic, yet ultimately just as harmful. I mean, the entire album really plays with that pendulum swing, to quote another part of the poem, but I just love how we get to explore two experiences or relationships, or more so the ending of them, on this same album, because it's like we can experience the same form of grief or losing ourselves into another person, even in such totally different ways. I mean, Taylor said it best, it was out of the oven and into the microwave.
A bit of milk, full fat, which I've warmed in the microwave.
Remember when Jack chaotically decided to just casually mention to us When You're Losing Me was written? Obviously he did that with Taylor's permission, and maybe even as a favor to her to pass on part of this story to us. I just remember reading that and thinking, holy shit, that was in the middle of her doing press for Red Taylor's version.
I was so focused on is anyone gonna like it? And then I was also at the time, honestly, really sad, because I'd actually gone through the stuff that I had sung about. But this time I'm just I've got sunglasses on and a mojito. It's really nice to be able to put this album out and and not be sad, not be taking breaks in between interviews to cry. I'm telling you, it's much better.
For Midnights to not even come out for another year after that, to be feeling that and to then write what essentially is the sister album to Red, much older, more grown up, more experienced sister, but still, it's just crazy. And if that's not proof that women can hold on to a relationship that they know is dying but don't want to give up hope yet, I don't know what is. I'm sure it's not just women, but I think that's very, very common in women. In fact, I was watching a breakdown last night of the lyrics to LOML, or LOML as I call it, by one of my beautiful friends, Nina, which if you haven't seen this video, I cannot recommend it enough. I thought I knew everything about this song that I could possibly pull from it, and yet no. I had so many revelations watching her video, so I cannot recommend it enough. I will link it below. Things like that just make me so thankful for the time that we live in. I know the internet a lot of the time drives me crazy with how negative people are to one another, and there's just such a lack of empathy so many times. But to be able to watch deep dives and video essays and just an exploration of an idea that I maybe never would have thought of makes me so happy. And I feel really lucky to get to be part of this culture and community that we exist in. I still remember I was so incredibly nervous to put out my video on would've, could've, should've, and the religious purity culture metaphors and messaging in that. The response to that and the conversation that I got to have with you guys in the comments of that video, almost nothing has made me feel more rewarded than those conversations that it opened up, because feeling understood or sharing an idea and getting to learn from others is just so powerful. And I'm realizing now how off track I'm getting, so I apologize. Sorry, where was I? Oh yes, I was thinking about staying in a relationship for so long, and especially when you compare that to a song like Mastermind, where she felt, even if it's in kind of a joking way, that she could control their love, to now not have that power to keep them together. That's so hard. Now, also on the note of things I don't think we've talked about enough is the literary references in this album. For an album that is titled The Tortured Poets Department, I don't think we've focused enough on the Tortured Poets. I obviously haven't made a specific video on this because I talked about it so much throughout my deep dive videos. But yeah, I just feel like the poets haven't really come up in much of the conversation I've seen at all. And maybe it is happening more in literary dedicated spaces, but it's something I really appreciate about this album because it was almost not woven in as a secret, but I think it just feels underappreciated to me. So obviously in the title track, Taylor kind of jokes about the seriousness of this person that uses a typewriter in modern day and is like, we're not Dylan Thomas, we're not Patti Smith, like don't take yourself so seriously, you're not this tortured, starving artist, which is a very interesting parallel to like New Romantics and Taylor having an interest in that era and then writing a song about it. But in addition to Dylan Thomas and Patti Smith, there were so many other poets that were referenced on this album. For example, think of J.M. Barrie, who wrote Peter Pan, linking to the song Peter. I apologize now if my lights turn my face rainbow, but we persevere. In So Long London, we have reference to The Great Gatsby. I think in Lommel, we have another reference to Patti Smith. A nod to Emily Dickinson in My Boy Only Breaks His Favorite Toys. I've seen other people say that the hedge maze in Guilty as Sin could be a nod to The Shining. Obviously, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, who wrote The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, which is directly referenced on The Albatross. Frances Hodgson Burnett wrote The Secret Garden, which is obviously referenced on I Hate It Here. Nancy Mitford's The Pursuit of Love is essentially the main inspiration for The Bolter, which I go into all of these in their individual deep dives, but like that song, the history of that, the films, the books that led up to that inspiration, so interesting. Obviously we have Cassandra being inspired by Greek mythology. There are obviously plenty that aren't confirmed, but theories. For example, on the manuscript, when Taylor says, the professor said to write what you know, my personal theory has been that that is a reference to Little Women, because that is what the professor, as Joe calls him, says to her. So in that case, we have Louisa May Alcott as well. I totally forgot to mention this, but I also think the album in general, but more specifically the song Fortnight, takes a lot of inspiration or even could be directly referencing Sylvia Plath and also Ted Hughes and their whole relationship. You can see the parallels I've drawn here, but I will link some TikToks below that have a greater explanation for this. I think a lot of the motifs around the wife watering flowers and especially the phone booth in the Fortnight music video are quite interesting, as well as noting that Sylvia died on a Monday in February. Then we obviously have the more modern real people that are mentioned, like Lucy Dacus, Charlie Puth, Jack Antonoff gets a mention, and I guess we could include Maddie Healy being an inspiration for a lot of these songs, including the title track, The Tortured Poets Department, and how this identity sort of weaves throughout time. You know, it's used in a sarcastic, almost not degrading way, but she's almost looking at someone being like, why are you trying to be so deep? When really this entire album is filled with tortured poets, even with Taylor in the promotion of this album calling herself the chairman of the Tortured Poets Department.
Sincerely, the chairman of the Tortured Poets Department.
Anyway, I just really appreciated that, and I feel like the fact that this album is literally titled The Tortured Poets Department, there hasn't been enough focus on the very large amount of tortured poets, or at least poets, woven throughout this album. So maybe that's a video job for someone like Jack Edwards or someone who has a background in literary education, but I've given my very best uneducated explanation in my deep dives of these songs, but it's just my favorite part of this album, I think, because it's kind of hidden a little bit, and yet it's also right there in the title. Another note that I have is I weirdly got so much hate for saying, so they filled my cell with snakes was like a double meaning, and you know, cell could refer to jail cell, but also cell being cell phone, because I said Americans often call mobiles, as we call them, a cell phone. And yeah, I got a lot of feedback saying, no we don't, we've never called them that, that doesn't mean that. I don't know if it's a Mandela effect, but I swear I've heard that like my whole life, a cell phone. But yeah, I apologize to Americans if I offended you for saying that it could mean that, but it's also just one person's interpretation. I guess I'll say another hot take here. It's okay if people have different interpretations of a song. There ends up being like a lot of discourse and let's just say bullying on spaces like Twitter and things like that if people have a different understanding of a song. And I don't know, like art is meant to be interpreted through our own lens and how we meet them with our own life experience. So once people start to attack each other, it diminishes the potential for that conversation to maybe learn something about a song or about ourselves. So let's just remember that everyone we meet or everyone we talk to knows something we don't. We all have a different perspective we can bring to the table. So if you guys have seen my album breakdown videos, you know I like to pick a lyric from each song that I feel could stand alone to represent the meaning of that song. And I also like to do this for an entire album. So for example, one lyric that represents the entire anthology. I kind of have a short list. I really considered Swirled You into all of my poems.
Swirled you into all of my poems.
It's such a powerful reflection of Taylor's ability to take an emotion, paint a picture, and tell a story of an encounter or an experience, no matter how short or long lived, and create the world that she has given us. She talked back in the day about writing Blank Space and how it was kind of an amalgamation of different ideas she'd had over time, and how you can kind of weave them together like a patchwork quilt to make a song. And so I guess this line to me just felt like a more deliberate version of that. You know, having a muse or a memory or situation in your life that when you were feeling maybe uninspired or felt that you couldn't write what you were feeling at that exact time, you could pull from this thing over here like a well of unlimited resource to inspire you. I just think that's such an incredible line. However, while I feel like that does represent a good chunk of the album, I didn't think it covered quite enough ground. So some of my other contenders were I'm Miserable and Nobody Even Knows, unfortunately.
I'm miserable and nobody even knows.
Another strong contender is I Love You, It's Ruining My Life.
I love you, it's ruining my life.
That could be applied to so many different things that we explore on this album. Oh, I really liked We Hereby Conduct This Postmortem. I think that especially ties in really well with Prologue or songs like Lommel, So Long London, and How Did It End.
We hereby conduct this postmortem.
This whole album is looking back at something in the aftermath, seeing how it impacted us during the experience, but also now afterwards. And a postmortem is an autopsy, right? So it's like trying to determine the cause of death, aka how did it end? Or even lyrics from But Daddy I Love Him about sanctimoniously performing soliloquies I'll never see, or vipers dressed in empath's clothing. It really was like the dissection of a personal experience, whether it was her dissecting it for her own art or the media, you know, the day that the Joe and Taylor breakup news came out and how every media outlet had an opinion on that, or people were expected to have an opinion on that and share the details. Even lyrics like, was any of it true? Or were you sent by someone who wanted me dead? Looking back at something and literally wondering, where did we go wrong? What did I do to have this catastrophic fallout? I also sadly really liked Am I Allowed to Cry? I think this is something I could make an entire video on. In fact, I wrote a bunch of notes for this once, but I think I felt like the time had passed. But it was to do with how we perceive empathy as something limited to those who have a similar life experience to us or worse, if that makes sense. Like if we perceive someone to be more privileged than us, especially monetarily, we tend to infer that they then can't feel sadness, or if they do, it's not really valid. I guess my opinion is just that I don't think privilege prevents us from feeling human emotion, and thank God it doesn't, because otherwise we wouldn't have, you know, some of our favorite works of art. And funnily enough, I don't think this is even anything to do with what Taylor's saying when she says, am I allowed to cry? But to me, it just poses a really interesting question of like, why do we view someone that's in a greater status than us as suddenly being unable to experience emotion, or if they do experience it, they shouldn't express it? I think it might have been in Nina's video. She talked about Max Martin, I think, said this, that Taylor has such a raw nerve that she can tap into to pull her emotions out of. And most of us, I think, don't have that direct line into our own hearts and souls, probably for preservation reasons and, you know, biological evolutionary standing, because it would be too painful. But Taylor kind of exists to me almost as, not to reference someone already on the album, but Charlie Puth, where like someone's just born with this innate ability that makes them really different to anyone else on like a cellular level. The way that Charlie can identify notes in such a weird way. Taylor's songwriting to me is, yes, something that she's worked on and perfected through practice and hard work, but I also just think she was born with this innate ability to access herself, and that includes not closing off her heart, remaining vulnerable. Anyway, this has been such a long-winded conversation again, I'm so sorry. But I do just think Am I Allowed to Cry poses a really interesting conversation around human nature, because my answer to Am I Allowed to Cry is yes. Ultimately, the lyric I have chosen for my thesis statement for this album is, and at last she knew what the agony had been for.
And at last she knew what the agony had been for.
I think that one line reframes every bit of suffering, heartache she'd ever endured, and puts it into perspective to what it gave her and what her life purpose is. You know, we know Taylor has said she feels the most happy and fulfilled when she's creating. So I really like that in tandem it can exist where she can feel so deeply about things, whether that is grief or loss or, you know, sad, hard emotions, but also to say, I'm glad I endured these because this is the outcome that I have. And that kind of brings me into my next point, which is viewing this album as a sister to Red. While I definitely think there are similarities on this album to her other work, for example, I think But Daddy I Love Him is so fearless, So High School is so Speak Now, and a lot of these songs, the Albatross, But Daddy I Love Him, I Hate It Here, I Look in People's Windows, Who's Afraid of Little Old Me, all very much deal with her relationship to fame in a way that 1989, but more so Reputation do. But I think ultimately we can probably all agree that the overwhelming theme of both this album and Red are going through heartbreak. I think on this album more so than Red, we see the depth of the loss of oneself explored a lot more. I think about the songs on Red, like Red, the title track, Treacherous, We Are Never Ever Getting Back Together, and All Too Well, obviously, and these are all incredible songs. But I feel like something Tortured Poets does a little bit more is examine our view of ourselves in that breakup or in that, you know, disillusion of a relationship or just in a moment of loss. Ultimately, I think Tortured Poets really strips back some of that more palatable presentation or packaging of this sentiment, you know, the sentiment of being brokenhearted. It's not put into a neat, simple box of sorrow or anger. I think Tortured Poets really pulled back the curtain to give a much more raw look at like the uglier or messier or less talked about feelings of desperation, psychosis, self-loathing, and just like that soul deep level of paralysis of what it feels like to, you know, lose what felt like half of yourself. I think the pain we feel from our first loss or first heartbreak is so poignant and so real, and Taylor captured that so beautifully in the All Too Well short film. But I also think it's easier to bounce back when we are that young. You probably think, well, I'm only 21, I'm gonna meet so many more people in my life. Even if you don't feel that initially, you can probably convince yourself throughout that healing process. I'm only 21, I'm gonna meet so many more people. I thought that person was the right one for me, but I've still got all this time ahead of me. To then later find what you think is your forever person, or to lose that and cope with this narrative of telling yourself it's okay that I lost that because it brought me back to this even better story, which, you know, which is like woven throughout my life, and now we've reconnected at the right time, and that will be, you could almost say like that is what the agony was for. Like this person, this relationship, this connection is what will actually fulfill and serve me. And to lose that too, to lose both of these at the same time, being in her mid-30s and singing about being with someone that convinced her they wanted the same things, talking rings and talking cradles, getting married and having kids, for that like rug to be pulled out from underneath her and that connection to disappear is a lot more scary. And I know obviously there are privileges that a wealthy person has in this situation, but I don't think we should diminish the loss that that would feel like. And on an album where she also has the lyric, all my friends, you know, my friends, they smell like weed or little babies, and she's mentioning the stages of life that her friends are in, you know, the ones that want to have families have done that. I'm pretty sure Taylor is godparent to a lot of her friends' children. Blake, Jamie King, possibly Abigail's. I'm sure that when you reach that stage in life, it's impossible to not draw comparisons, especially if it's something that you had wanted and has since been like ripped away from you. Especially with that line, like, shit talked me under the table, talking rings and talking cradles. That didn't come true for her, and now that person that she wrote it about, who put her ring on her ring finger and then it ended, is now engaged to someone else.
And then he did get it together. He became that guy, and he gets to be that guy with her.
That's such a raw thing to feel, but I just love that Taylor really gave herself permission on this album to not only feel everything, but to share it too. You know, I can definitely imagine a younger and more censored version of Taylor having to cut some of that back, especially maybe when she was still with Big Machine Records. You know, earlier on in the career, they had a lot more of a say, or maybe even just out of self-preservation, feeling a need to water some of that down or write it in a more presentable way. I'm really glad she didn't. The album itself opens with, I was supposed to be sent away, kind of following on from Hits Different or Have They Come to Take Me Away. You know, we have confessions of functioning alcoholism, the doubt and self-loathing and almost suicidal ideation. And ultimately, all of that just comes back to me with the feeling of like, how did someone feel these feelings and still manage to create something so phenomenal? For anyone that has felt anything close to these emotions, you'll probably agree with me when I say we're not in a functioning state. Like, when I've been at my lowest due to grief or loss, all I can do is lay in bed and wait for the time to pass, you know? Like, I know she acknowledged it on this album herself, I can do it with a broken heart, but I don't even think that's been really appreciated enough, because I was gonna say I don't know how she does it, but I guess that's kind of what artists are. Poets and painters and storytellers take their pain and turn it into art. But I think for me, I've only really been able to do that in hindsight, never so much in the moment when it's so raw. So hats off to Taylor and anyone that can take something so real and live that you're still experiencing and create something so beautiful with it. And also on the notion of people saying the album should have been cut down and have fewer songs. I understand that 31 tracks is overwhelming. I mean, even when it came out for me, and I felt pretty overstimulated after reacting to the first part of the album, and it didn't even come out at midnight for me. So I can't imagine if any of you reactors out there did do that at midnight. Shout out to my friends Caitlin, Troy, and Ashley. I think it might have been quite late at night for them, but yeah, I can understand that perspective of this is a lot to receive at once, or even now, you know, 31 songs is a lot to emotionally process. But when people say they wish it was cut down and it was only a 13-track album, I can't agree with that, because if I proposed for this to even be a 20-song album, I wouldn't get to pick which songs never came out. What if that happened and now suddenly your 10 favorite songs were never on the album? To me, it makes more sense to take what we have, and if you would like to create a playlist of just your favorites, problem solved. Okay, it is finally time to get into the unpopular opinions. By the way, if you're still watching at this point, give the video a like for everyone's bravery. I really appreciate that you guys are willing to share these thoughts with me. Maybe I'm gonna regret that. So high school shouldn't be in the Tortured Poets department. It breaks the whole theme. So I agree that it breaks the theme both thematically and sonically, but I kind of like that. I think it's a really good thing, to the point where I would love to know what the secret message for this song would be if she was still doing those. In fact, let me know in the comments if you could pick 3 songs from the entire anthology to get the secret message for, like we used to in the old albums, which would they be? So the entire theme of this album is tortured poets, right? We have Taylor herself, we have the literary references strewn throughout, and we also have the 2 kind of key relationships that she experiences and sings about on this album, both being with tortured poets, and ultimately how those relationships destroyed her a little bit. Now this song is about someone that decidedly is not a tortured poet, not tortured or a poet, and I think after everything she's been through, that must feel the way that this song feels to me amongst all of the other tracks, which is like a very positive breath of fresh air. I mean, look at lyrics like "No one's ever had me, not like you," and comparing this song to the rest, which are like raw and vulnerable and sad or angry or grief-stricken. It kind of lines up with the lyric from the Alchemy, "These blokes warm the benches." This past decade of her life was filled with tortured poets, you know, artsy men. So this song to me kind of reflects maybe the way that a new, very different experience might feel, which is like lighthearted and joyful. I think it's really easy to romanticize and glorify poetic but tortured men or women, or like that kind of relationship that's really, I mean, we don't want to get into my opinion on book boyfriends, but you know, that kind of serious. Oh, here's a great example. Jess from Gilmore Girls. I would call Jess a tortured poets type.
Why? The Fountainhead is classic.
Yeah, but Ayn Rand is a political nut.
Yeah, but nobody could write a 40-page monologue the way that she could.
Okay, tomorrow I will try again, and you will...
Give the painful Ernest Hemingway another chance.
Finally have a first love like what you and Dean have.
Right. All those things about you and me, all those things about me lying to him and messing with his head. He was right.
I don't know, I think maybe Tolstoy's just a little over my head.
You've read this before. Hi.
Hi.
Just don't be mad.
I'm not. I'm not mad.
Feet again. There's nothing standing in your way now, because I'm out.
You wrote a book.
So?
And I'm ready. I'm ready for this. You can count on me now. I know you couldn't count on me before, but you can now.
And while they were able to have incredible, meaningful discussions and conversation and be inspired by one another.
Worship Kerouac and Bukowski. God forbid you'd pick up anything by Jane Austen.
Hey, I've read Jane Austen.
You have?
Yeah, and I think she would have liked Bukowski.
That's a great muse, but ultimately kind of a little bit destructive also.
He had a halo of the highest grade. He just hadn't met me.
Guys, after making this edit, I realized that pretty much every song on this album can relate to either Rory and Jess or Rory and a different heartbreak or relationship.
Your parents just made it sound like I was holed up in the Chelsea with a needle sticking out of my arm, screaming "sit" at the top of my lungs.
This is the second time I let myself do this.
Do what?
Think I finally found it. I'm never gonna have it. I hate admitting it because I fancy myself Wonder Woman, but I really want it. I always thought if he could just get it together, grow up, maybe we could do it.
Listen to But Daddy I Love Him while thinking about Jess and Rory. Whole new ball game. I won't harp on more in this video for those that don't care about Gilmore Girls, but let's please chat about this in the comments. I have so much to say. And I don't think I can use Tristan, Dean, or Logan to represent So High School and that new relationship, but to have someone so unapologetically themselves, unafraid to celebrate you, positive and outgoing and just the opposite of a tortured poet, I think would be very refreshing because it's kind of who Taylor is at her core. I've always said that I think there's one track on each song that represents the next album and also one that represents the prior album, and to me So High School is very much our TS12 taster, likely both thematically and sonically again, so I'm very excited for that. I totally forgot to mention, but it is incredibly Taylor to put kind of an upbeat banger of a song, whether in lyrics or vibe, as a track 6 to directly follow up the emotional, vulnerable moment that is a track 5. We have You Belong With Me, 22, Shake It Off, and in the case of Tortured Poets Department and the anthology, we have But Daddy I Love Him and So High School, which just ironically happen to be kind of my 2 favorites, so I'll never hate a track 6. I also think it was important to kind of close this chapter of her life, as she said in the insummation poem, being like, that's all done now, that's behind me, I've moved on. I think it's the same reason she made that Fortnite video and put it out the day that the album came out, to be like, yes, I wrote that, yes, I went through that and experienced that, and that's here on this album, but this is how I feel right now. So like, don't get too caught up in the art of it all because it's in the past now. Okay, apart from the bridge, The Smallest Man Who Ever Lived is a mid song. I will say the bridge does feel like a completely different song to me, and I used to find that a reason to not listen to it as much because it felt so jarringly different. I was like kind of always waiting to get to the bridge for that big payoff. But I think it almost represents the feeling that she's singing about. That grief on the song starts as questioning. Was any of it true? You know, then we see bargaining, like in public you showed me off, but then you sank in stoned oblivion. By the time we get to that bridge, it represents this explosion of anger that had been building up the whole time. That feeling of sorrow and depression has been replaced by a wave of rage. Finally, at the end, she reaches acceptance with, I'll forget you, but I'll never forgive. Yeah, it's one of those songs that I know hits people so hard in the way that would've, could've, should've hits me. And I wish I had that feeling. Maybe someday I will. Like what I said about Fresh Out the Slammer, I was like, I hope that someday this song hits you guys because it's so phenomenal. And I know that The Smallest Man has the potential for that. Maybe I've just got to go through like a life experience that helps me relate to it. But the parallel of Get Love Quick Scheme and Miracle Move On Drug is fire, right? This is one of my favorite themes that is woven throughout the album. We even see that on the insummation poem with Out of the Oven and Into the Microwave, the kind of dual versions of pain, and the same kind of pain but from a different experience. Or even on But Daddy I Love Him, bedroom eyes like a remedy, like literally using this person as the cure, as the fix. And that is something we see throughout Taylor's entire discography. You know, it's a very important reminder that anything that takes the pain away or numbs it temporarily or acts as a distraction will likely impact us quite negatively in the long run compared to if we just let ourselves feel that pain. So sorry to quote Harry Potter here, but my brain was raised on this as a kid, so it's where my connection goes. But I've always loved that quote, numbing the pain for a while only makes it worse once you finally feel it. For making that reference, I will now make a contribution to a trans organization because I do still really appreciate some of that writing, but also fuck JK Rowling. But yeah, I think ultimately anything that benefits or soothes very quickly or even gives us an immediate burst of serotonin in some kind of instant way typically leaves us worse off in the long run. You know, any kind of instant gratification typically is not the option that we should be choosing. But of course, when we are in the throes of heartbreak, how nice is it to have that option of this person that's been there since we were young, has seen us through all of these different periods, and to tell yourself, oh, that's why this other one didn't work out, because this person really gets me and that's my destiny. It is the most human coping mechanism, and not even coping mechanism, but just like assumption to make. But yes, I agree with you. That is one of my favorite kind of metaphors or themes of this whole album. Rather than making you wait till the end, I'll tell you some of my unpopular opinions first. This feels crazy for me to say because it is one of my favorite songs, but on So High School, I wish the song just started with the guitar. The part at the start has such like an eerie, unsettling feeling to me, almost like a would've, could've, should've vibe. And then the guitar is so incredibly nostalgic and feel good that I wish it just started there. Okay, Okay, secondly, this might not be an unpopular opinion, but it feels controversial to say. I don't think I will fully love the song Robin until I become a parent. I think I can appreciate the song. I understand it.
I get it. Like, I respect it.
But I think to fully enjoy it as a song, I have to be able to relate to it more in the sense of like looking at a child that I have such a strong connection with. And guess what? I also think that's okay. Okay, also, God, I love finding out misheard lyrics, because I thought in But Daddy I Love Him that she said, just screeching tires of true love. And I only learned from Twitter this week that it's screeching tires and true love. And I actually think that's worse. I prefer what I was hearing and will continue to sing, because to me, screeching tires and true love, okay, they're two separate things. You're just listing the things that you're experiencing in that moment, right? Screeching tires of the getaway car and the true love that you feel. Screeching tires of true love paints such a beautiful picture to me. I mean, it's essentially the same thing. It's us running away from people we don't care of the opinion for, but it feels like a more artistic, holistic statement to me. So I prefer that. I'm actually nervous to even address this one, but this was one of the most submitted things to me. So The Alchemy is about Maddie Healy. Firstly, it obviously does not matter who any of these songs are about. It doesn't really impact our experience or enjoyment of the song, but I find that take very interesting, because to me, the line, the hospital was a drag, worst sleep that I ever had. I circled you on a map. We know what the jail represents and we know what the hospital represents. So to me, to say the hospital was a drag, that's in the past. To then say, I circled you on a map. To me, that means the song is addressed to the person she circled on a map, which I feel like we know is a reference to the putting Travis Kelce on the map joke. But I think it's key to remember the lyric, swirled you into all of my poems. Like, these songs can be a patchwork quilt of different experiences, different emotions. You can pull inspiration or feelings from multiple times over your life. Just look at Midnights. But yeah, when you think about what Taylor mashed this up with when she sang it,
shirts off and your friends lift you up over their heads. Beer sticking to the floor. Cheers chanted cause they said there was no chance. Trying to be the greatest in the league. Where's the trophy? He just comes running over to me. These folks from the benches leaving on a winning streak. He jokes that it's heroin. This time in the knee. Cause the side on your heart said it's still reserved for me. Honestly, who are we to fight the alchemy?
before Taylor sang The Alchemy, she made a point of saying, this is our 87th show.
Can you believe this is our 87th show?
So when I touch down, call the amateurs and cut them from the team.
She deliberately made it track 15 because 8 plus 7 equals 15. These blokes warmed the benches. Blokes means British men because that was who was like filling that position for her and is not anymore. That Child's Play back in school connects both to So High School, but also that interview back in the day that was like Kiss, Marry, Kill, the very childish school kind of antics.
Taylor Swift, Ariana Grande, Katy Perry. Kill, Marry, Kiss.
Damn, that's messed up. I don't want to kill any of them.
Well, you know, it's just the game.
Just a game.
It's just a game, but really.
Taylor Swift would be the Kiss.
Kim Kardashian, Khloe Kardashian, Kylie Jenner. Kill, Marry, Kiss. So marry Kim, kiss Kylie, kill Khloe.
Yes.
Okay.
What is it? What kind of game is this?
I'm torturing you.
This is torture.
These chemicals hit me like white wine. Drink what you think and I'm high from smoking your jokes all the night.
The sign on your heart says it's still reserved for me. I think that could be a nod to the fact that on the jersey 87 still leaves room for 13. You guys have said you were at the concert when she sang this and she changed Cheers chanting to Cheaps chanting. Plus the lines of like shirts off and your friends lift you up over their heads, beer sticking to the floor, where's the trophy, winning streak, one to beat, greatest in the league. Like these are all very clearly football references. So even if some lyrics are pulled from like a different song she was writing, this song, the finished product of this song, is not about Maddie Healy. I don't think Taylor would have sang this at her 87th show after saying, "This is my 87th show," wearing Chiefs colours, beaming up at Travis, if this was about the smallest man who ever lived. Just want to share that in 1 year I grew from the prophecy girl to the bolter girl. Maybe one more year and you can be a so high school girl. In my personal ranking, I can't decide if Midnights belongs above Tortured Poets or not. I find it so incredible that people can rank their personal preference of the albums, because I just have no objective ability to do that. It's like picking favorite children. I can't do it. And like I said earlier, I think we really can't remove recency bias from our minds, unfortunately. I low-key have no hot takes. This album is a masterpiece and I die for it. Totally agree. Tell me why I ever thought Fortnite was mid. That shit with a glass of wine slaps. If anyone doesn't appreciate Fortnite yet, just listen to the outro. The outro alone, oh my god, so good. I would also say that for the Alchemy. The Alchemy was the song that got my arms doing this on reaction day, so it's good. I really disliked Tortured Poets on first listen, but it got better each listen and watching creators explain the lore. Okay, that makes me really happy, because that is why I make these videos, and that's why I made my Fearless deep dive, because so many people rank it last in their albums, and I was like, but what if you knew this, you know? Could this make you love it more? Yeah, it's one of the reasons that I love having conversations with friends and like watching other video essays, you know, about films, songs, books, you know, any art. Hearing someone else's thoughts can unlock a whole new perspective, and that to me is so fun. Fresh Out the Slammer is my least favorite because of the stressed syllables at the start of each verse. It's unpleasant. That is so interesting, because that is arguably one of my favorite parts of the song. The way it feels like chasing, trying to catch up to your thoughts or the emotion of this relationship. It's so good.
Weather, summer, taking cover, calling thunder, he don't understand me. Gray and blue and fights and tunnels, handcuffed to the spell I was under.
The metaphor of jail as a relationship. The fact that like, this is how I learned that in some prisons they only get outside for an hour a day. To include that, like the fact that that's how she was feeling. Oh, I will never be over this song, and I'm so glad people are like waking up to how good it is. I feel personally vindicated. Too many songs had names as titles without an explanation. Interesting that you say that, because I feel like they all had an explanation. Let me run through the track list and maybe we can explain some. The first one would be Clara Bow. Okay, so if you didn't see my deep dive on Clara Bow, that was an old silent film star. Her name and her identity isn't integral to the song's meaning, because like my interpretation of Chloe or Sam or Sophia or Marcus, this feeling applies to everyone. So in Chloe or Sam, it's like, it doesn't matter who the people are that you might be out with. I feel the same regardless. And in Clara Bow, it's kind of saying every woman that comes through this industry, whether it's Clara Bow, Stevie Nicks, Taylor Swift, or the next version of that, we will all be treated the same way. It's more a comment on the system itself. Well, I got so carried away talking about Clara Bow that I forgot to explain the rest of the names, like Chloe or Sam or Sophia or Marcus. Thank you, Amy, Cassandra, Peter, or Robin. So I go in depth into all of these in my Tortured Poets deep dive. Every single name here has relevance, and I explain all the references and the meanings. So rather than repeating myself here, I will leave those links for you below, and I hope it can help. Calling Joe the smallest man who ever lived is kind of rude. I'm not judging, but not agreeing. Would it make you feel better if I told you she didn't call Joe the smallest man who ever lived? Listening to The Bolter from the perspective of Meredith Grey changed my life. I love interpreting these songs through the perspective of a fictional character or fictional relationships. Obviously, So High School is very fun with the Nathan and Haley, the Troy and Gabriella of it all. I feel like I haven't rewatched the early seasons in so long that I forget what Derek Meredith was like the way that Ellis impacted her and her relationship with men. Let's talk about it. In fact, I would love to hear from you guys in the comments which fictional characters you see represented in these songs. Obviously, I did, for my deep dive, put kind of like a photo card of who I saw this song being. I can't remember who I put for the Bolter, but I had a lot of fun picking those. Not sure if you covered Fortnite being the start of her and Maddie 14 years ago. That is really interesting. I have not really kept up at all with like the timeline of their connection. In fact, like I don't even think I knew about that being a rumor like back in the day. But if that's the case, that's a really interesting way to frame that, because as I learned through this album cycle, Fortnite is not a word that like Americans really know or use, which is surprising because it's very commonly used here. But I guess the fact that it's a British word makes sense. But also, yeah, the fact that people kind of scrambled to make sense of it, and I think a lot of people that didn't understand the album were kind of like, well, how can you write these songs about someone you dated for 2 weeks when it doesn't mean that literally? really. I really like that perspective that you could view these 14 years as 14 days. Now, if we think about midnights being 13 sleepless nights and fortnight is the night after that, now we're cooking with gas. In my opinion, the lowercase vault line in Guilty as Sin could refer to the Reputation vault tracks. Totally. It could also represent Folklore and Evermore vault tracks. I think the interesting part of that line is keeping them locked in lowercase. Like, we focus on the fact that they're like from the vault songs, but they're still locked. And obviously the lowercase part is very telling. You know, these are not 1989 or Midnight's vault tracks. What's interesting to me is that they are still locked. Does that mean that we A, have not heard them, and B, will never hear them? Even when we get the rep vault songs, will these remain locked inside the vault? I think the crowd was chanting more was supposed to be a brag, not something that upset her. I would love to agree with this because it would make me feel less sad, but I think when we add in the context of the previous line, all the pieces of me shattered as the crowd was chanting more. I think if it were a brag, it would be like the crowd was chanting, yay, or like, we love this, we support this, but rather it was demanding more of someone that was already falling apart. And I don't think this line is necessarily a dig at the fans. I think it is more a reflection of her own strength and like ability to persevere through that, because she's saying like, I was shattered, people were asking for more of me and I was able to give it. Besides The Smallest Man Who Ever Lived, Lommel and So Long London, the first part of the Tortured Poets department is average/okay. This is crazy for me to read because I'm not going to call them skips, they're not, but these are like some of the songs I listen to the least. That means that this person does not listen to Fresh Out the Slammer, But Daddy I Love Him, Down Bad, I Can Fix Him, No Really I Can, Fortnight, Clara Bow, Guilty as Sin. How can you look at this album and say, I don't need Guilty as Sin? Crazy. I'm still not sure what the Tortured Poets department is. Is it a metaphor? I really hope that this video has explained that now, but if it hasn't, let me know because I can go into more detail in a comment. But it kind of is a metaphor and also directly is not, because this album is literally made up of tortured poets. It came out when I needed it the most, but now I can't listen to it. It gives me anxiety. That's so real, and I think that's indicative of how relatable Taylor's songs are, to the point where sometimes they're too relatable. So definitely don't feel bad about that. Don't put yourself through anything that gives you anxiety. I had a similar experience the other day when I'm Gonna Get You Back came on for the first time in a long time. That's a song I played on repeat last year when I was going through like probably the hardest time of my entire life. That was just like a safe song for me at the time. And hearing those opening notes took me right back to that feeling. And I was like, skip. I just cannot be in that headspace or mindset today. So good for you for knowing your boundaries and your limits. Listen to something that makes you feel great. Fresh Out the Slammer and But Daddy I Love Him and Guilty as Sin are the best songs ever. Did I send this in from my burner account? I completely agree. Guilty as Sin finally clicked for me after getting a crush on someone I shouldn't be crushing on. Oops, not gonna lie. I love that that happened for you. It's truly like unlocking a new part of the human experience. I said this to a friend after going through like a really deep heartbreak. I was like, it sucks so much. It's the worst thing. Wouldn't wish it on anyone. But upside, silver lining, I now can connect and relate to more Taylor Swift songs. So it was not a good spring into summer album. It should have been fall into winter. That's really interesting because for me, who lives in the Southern Hemisphere, it was an autumn into winter album. I just don't think Taylor could have held this off for 6 more months. As we know, she needed to write this album and I think needed to release it in order to like free herself of the feeling and move forward. But also I would argue Guilty as Sin and Fresh Out the Slammer could have been songs of the summer. We deserved more music videos and singles from this era. I could really be like overlooking something here, but I feel like releasing songs as a single does not impact me personally in any way at all. Like, I'm gonna put on the album on vinyl, on Spotify, and listen to it there. So I guess it being on the radio doesn't impact me personally. If anything, I would say songs being a single often negatively impact the song for me because it's overplayed. But music videos I find very interesting because, as we know, Taylor was on the Eras tour when this came out. So like, I don't know when people think she could have created more music videos for this. I think the next best thing that we got from this was like the tour visuals. The fact that she was able to rehearse and all of the dancers and her band were able to add this into the tour whilst on the tour is insane, and we were so lucky for that, and those visuals kind of represent the song in that way. But I also think, again, like, this wasn't an album that needed that. This album wasn't for winning a Grammy or winning VMA for best music video. This was an album born of necessity. and release. So I don't know, I guess I'm happy that Taylor didn't have to spend any longer than necessary in this time. I totally get that visuals are fun and add to an album, but I just don't think that was the purpose for this album. Weirdly, I got a lot of submissions like that. Like, we needed more era in this era. Videos, interviews, more Tortured Poets vibe. I obviously don't think she should have been overexerting herself to make more music videos whilst touring and traveling in between cities. I don't really know what she could have said in an interview, because imagine the kind of questions she would have been asked. It would have just been like, who's this song about? Hey, how suicidal were you really? I just don't think this is the album for interviews. So when you say more TTPD vibe, I think we got the vibe, because the vibe was kind of like pain and isolation, addressing it and moving forward. Person is calling out the connection between the one and Lommel, digging up the grave another time and should have let it stay buried. I absolutely love that, and I will add one more, which is from me, which is I never leave well enough alone. I tweeted something about how that lyric and the one, they're from such vastly different albums, but in her catalogue they're only 4 songs apart, and I love how, oh my god, and I'm addicted to the if only. It's one of my favorite through lines in her music. I got these 2 submissions side by side and it just made me so happy. You've changed my opinion on Guilty as Sin. I didn't care about it and now I think it's a bop. I didn't like at all I'm Gonna Get You Back, but it grew on me so much thanks to you. I cannot tell you how much that means. I don't feel like my job is to convince you to like something, but if I'm able to like shed a new light or help you appreciate something in a different way, that is truly a dream come true for me. So thank you for saying that. I really don't mind if people have different opinions to me. I think we all have different tastes and that's a great thing. But being able to like connect through a song or share a new meaning of something, that's what we're all here for. I thought at the end of I Can Fix Him was or maybe I can't. After realizing it was whoa, maybe I can't. I love it. Yeah, totally agree. I think it takes on a totally different meaning. That whoa is said with such like an urgent realization. I think I likened it to when you're horse riding and they kind of jump up in the air and you're like, whoa, like trying to steady it. You almost just in that moment realize the danger you're in, especially in a song like this where it's like you're trying desperately to convince yourself of something that probably your subconscious and your friends and your mum are screaming you to not believe, and you know, they have a very different opinion. I think that whoa really paints a picture of like, what is it that was the final straw that like broke the camel's back? What is it that made you realize, oh shit, like they were right, I can't fix this person. You were right when you said Fresh Out the Slammer was going to hit at some point. I'm so glad. To me, it was like almost a feeling of bewilderment when I saw how low people were ranking that song, or just like not caring about it, not talking about it. To me, Fresh Out the Slammer was and still is one of the best things she's ever written. I think it's such a great idea that we've never seen explored in her work before. Again, like the miracle move on drug, that entire concept being explored here about the transference of pain and love almost, and how using that new person as a coping mechanism. Well, I guess that's a realization that comes after this song, but the concept of how nice it would be to, you know, to ignore our pain and move on to the next thing. Oh, I just think it's a genius song. Who's Afraid of Little Old Me is so Elena Gilbert coded. Again, love this conversation. To me, this is more of a Catherine song, but I would love to hear more on your perspective as to why you see this as Elena. It's even a little bit more Mona Vanderwaal, like a bit more, especially the you should be. I feel like Elena doesn't have that confidence to say like, you should be afraid of me. Maybe when she's up against like Klaus. I want to talk about this in the comments. I'm very intrigued by this submission. It is long-winded. It is self-indulgent. It is her best album. So I really liked this submission because I don't know that I agree with it, but I really appreciated your ability to have this like multifaceted approach to the album. It's something that I would love to see more room for when we're discussing art. Would we argue that all art or creation has to be a little bit self-indulgent because we're making something about our own experience and showing it to others? I just really appreciated this submission, and I feel like you're the kind of person that I would love to have a conversation with, because your opinion here is not so black and white, and I really like that. I also laughed because I got these submissions side by side, both saying Clara Bow is underrated. Completely agree. That is one that maybe after Fresh Out the Slammer, I would say people are sleeping on too much. This song has similar themes to Nothing New, but to me, I love this song way more. That said, I am also one of the world's few The Lucky One stans, so, but yeah, I just really love anytime Taylor has a commentary on the industry, and especially what it's like to be a woman in the industry, and I would like to see more appreciation for this song. The Tortured Poets cardigan and merch is really ugly. I actually really disagree with that. I think the Tortured Poets cardigan is one of the most wearable. To me, a piece of grey knitwear is always going to be wearable, so it's one of my favorites. I don't really remember the rest of the merch. I think this merch is some of the most wearable because it's neutrals, it's not in your face, just a picture of the album all the time. You know, I don't have much of it. I think I just have the cardigan, but I like it. Well, I like this submission on my Instagram. I think I'm really slow and it was obvious for everyone else, but the parallels between You're Losing Me, My Face Was Grey, and So Long London, I'm Just Getting Colour Back in My Face, just kicked one random day and blew my mind. This is one of my favorite experiences as a music fan, but also specifically as a Taylor fan, when something hits you years later. This is very key, and especially when you add in the other references to colour throughout Taylor's discography. Grey and blue and fights and tunnels. The fact that Taylor refers to herself here as the one that was grey, and the fact that the visuals of this album are grey. Like, people thought it was going to be Reputation. They thought it was black and white, but it's not. It's grey, or shades of grey, we could even say.
Just a paper waiting, shades of grey.
You know, when you link that to grey and blue and fights and tunnels, if Taylor is grey.
My face was grey, but you wouldn't admit that we were sick. All you want is grey for me.
We very much know who Taylor has always referred to as blue throughout her songs.
Oh damn, never seen that color blue. Ocean blue eyes. My heart's been borrowed and yours has been blue. It's blue, the feeling I got in it. I'm with you, even if it makes me blue. I blew things out of proportion, now you're blue. Give me the blues and then purple pink skies. If you cascade ocean wave blues, come no other shade of blue but you.
So then you get grey and blue and fights and tunnels. Oh my god, I love it. Down Bad is about New Moon. No one will believe he existed, leaving her in a field in her same old town, leaving her safe and stranded. How did I not make this connection? At least I don't think I did. Yeah, obsessed with this. Thank you, Tara. Surely I already knew that Down Bad is a clear parallel to Haunted, like being haunted by someone's memory. How did I not make this connection? I love your brain. Thank you.
In a field in my same old town that somehow seems so hollow now. I'm bad crying at the gym. Might just die, it would make no difference.
I also really like this. So this is from In Sweetness on Instagram. I have a legit essay pending on this, but I think so many people miss how deeply woven Speak Now is in Tortured Poets. The main narrative of both tell a story of a girl who falls in love with a man with a contentious reputation, spends all of her energy trying to prove the world wrong about him while simultaneously struggling to be seen and respected, to find power in the relationship itself, and ultimately end with her being left broken and betrayed by this man when he leaves. There are so many direct thematic parallels in the songs. I Can See You versus Guilty as Sin. That's T. Ours versus But Daddy I Love Him, of course. Superman versus I Can Fix Him. I'm gonna need to go and re-listen to Superman to find that connection, but I appreciate it. Haunted versus Down Bad. There you go. Dear John versus The Smallest Man Who Ever Lived. Oh, absolutely. And the big kicker is how the manuscript starts in the Speak Now era with its nods to yearning for adulthood and maturity throughout the symbology of morning coffee with one's husband, Foolish One, and the mention of her still sleeping in her mother's bed as a search for comfort, pre-Never Grow Up. I love your brain so much. I'm gonna go re-listen to the entire anthology with that mindset now. If anyone has any other connections, leave them below. Oh, I also love this. Tortured Poets Revelation. In the prophecy, the lyrics, but I howl like a wolf at the moon. And later in the song, she oohs after the bridge, literally sound like a wolf howling. Yeah, I love that.
But I howl like a wolf at the moon.
When she says in So Long London, my friend said it isn't right to be scared every day of a love affair. I always assumed she was being fearful about her partner cheating on her, but it wasn't until recently that the thought came to me that she might be talking about herself there, that she's scared of cheating on him, referencing Guilty as Sin. I actually had a pretty different interpretation of that line. To me, my friend said it isn't right to be scared every day of a love affair kind of more ties into the context of the other lines, like when you're not sure if he wants to be there. To me, it wasn't about being afraid of cheating, but rather just the loss of love and like maybe being abandoned or losing this person. So I never personally felt that was like anxiety around being cheated on, but more about the pain of what the relationship had become and like how distant they felt. Because I think the key like messaging in Guilty as Sin is without ever touching his skin. There was a clear line drawn, no cheating happened. It was just fantasizing. I'm scrolling through now and I'm gonna pick one at random for us to end on. I'm gonna have to do so much screenshotting. It feels like a bunch of songs thrown together without a clear storyline. I seem to remember a similar thing being said about her sister album, Red, you know, being incohesive, but I think life is incohesive. So to me, I don't mind that at all. The rollout has been disappointing. Wish we were on our 3rd or 4th single at this point. I just think that wasn't the point of this album. I keep going back to that quote that Taylor said, only once we've told our saddest story can we be free of it. I think she wants to be free of it, but it was a crime that Guilty as Sin wasn't a single. Okay, I'm gonna end on this because I really like it. There was only one music video because it represented the whole album, not just Fortnite. Incredible take. I think most of you probably agree with the theory that both Taylor and Austin in the music video represent different stages of her life and like different connections. I mean, we have the hospital, we have the tattoos, the kind of feeling of soulmate swirling around. The biggest indicator of this to me is that final scene. I think that kind of tells the story from start to finish, almost in a similar way of kind of the perspective shift in But Daddy I Love Him. We get to see a glimpse of the pivot in the story and where things end up. Actually, maybe I'll end on this because it's kind of beautiful and almost disagrees with something I said earlier. Robin moves me so much as someone who's healing inner child, and I never hear people talk about it. That's really a fair point. A lot of us feel like we don't connect with Robin as much because maybe we didn't need to hear these things that Taylor's singing, but some people probably really did. And in that case, that just only further supports the fact that I'm grateful for all of these songs existing. I think that's really important, and I'm also just so glad that song is helping you. It is getting dark now, so I definitely should go. But in the comments, I would love to hear more of your revelations about this album, whether it be lyrical parallels, understandings that you have unlocked in the past year, or alternatively, an apology to me for everyone who said Fresh Out the Slammer was a bad song. Just a reminder that I have never been wrong in my life. Thank you so much. Thank you for being with me here today, but even more than that, on this past year, I had so much fun theorizing what this album might look like and sound like. And sometimes I sit here talking to myself, forgetting that people are actually hearing my thoughts. Like the fact that the point I made was used in a Miss Mojo video on YouTube, someone like a channel that I love. That was such a big deal to me and reminded me of there are actually people out there watching this, which is kind of terrifying, but that meant so much to me that we could take this beautiful work of art album and come together with our own personal different lived experiences and kind of, much like a language analysis or English class, dissect what might the author mean here. I have so much fun doing this. So thank you guys. Thank you for being open about your opinions and open to hearing mine. Even when we don't agree, I find this really fun. Maybe even more so because I love hearing opinions that are totally different to my own. So thank you for this entire era, which feels weird to be like maybe saying goodbye to this, who knows? So thank you for being here with me throughout this entire era and for whatever comes next. If you guys have any videos that you would like to see from me, let me know below. I am open to pretty much anything, but yeah, also thank you so much for the love on my Fearless deep dive. Fearless will just always be my baby, so that meant so much to me. And again, give that video a like if you want me to do a part 2 about the songs themselves. I don't think I can say thank you any more times, so I love you all and I'll see you next time. Bye!
Is this what it feels like to grow up?